What's your name again?
Keith McHenry.
And Keith, you're here for, I guess, a protest of some sort?
It's not a protest, it's a meeting to discuss just the possibilities of what would happen with Grants Pass versus Johnson, the Supreme Court ruling which would potentially overturn things like Martin versus Boise. What effect would that have on homeless people? What is what government, how can they perceive it and use it to their advantage, whatever the ruling is.
But what difference does it make since Santa Cruz does not pay any attention to Martin versus Boise or this decision anyway?
Well, this is the issue, is that it's not that they don't, not only do they not pay attention to it, so if we get an alleged favorable ruling, that I could perceive them as saying, okay, then that means if we get the favorable ruling that they uphold Martin versus Boise,
Sorry.
then what would happen is that they would go, okay, then we have to have a place for everybody if we're going to can't legally criminalize all the people living outside.
Wait a minute, Jeremy Leonard says we do have a place.
Yeah, right. Place during his...
He's a county spokesperson.
Oh, great. He's also the main distributor of fentanyl in our town, but that's cool.
So that, Jeremy, you got a lawsuit ready for this guy? Go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead. It's funny because I happened to find that out by accident. So there's this meeting here, and I'm handing out these flyers.
What are the flyers?
And it's an emergency meeting on the Supreme Court ruling on anti-camping laws in the Grants Pass v. Johnson case. And join us Monday at 5 at City Hall. And we'll be reviewing our response to the Supreme Court ruling expected this week on the constitutionality of the anti-camping laws in the Grants Pass v. Johnson case. So I was going to my friends and reminding them of
in the library.
In the library,
This is the main branch of the public library.
Yeah, and reminding them of this would be happening. And then as I actually ran out of flyers, unfortunately, except for this one, they were like, this woman goes, oh, you can't hand out flyers in here, and it's against the rules. And I go, what? I don't care.
What did she say when you made this
she was pretty freaked out. It said, like, well, you're going to get banned from here and stuff. And I said, I don't really care. And I said, I'm getting the security guard. I said, well, I still don't care. and I will never care.
What can make you care?
And nothing will make me care about it. Because it's a lot.
This is a kind of hard-hearted man. Go ahead.
Yeah, because it's so funny because I'm very quiet. I only go actually to a person that I know, and I whisper to them, and I leave them a flyer. It's not handing out flyers and randomly in the library. It's me visiting friends, leaving a flyer next to them and reminding them of the meeting. And so it's not really the same as handing out flyers.
Did you explain this to the woman?
Yeah, that's what I told her. I said, at first before she got all real huffy, I said, I'm just leaving flyers with my friends here and inviting them to a meeting across the street.
At which point she
said,
backed off?
and then she goes, no, it's like you're not allowed to hand out flyers in here. And then that's when I said I don't care. I will be handing out flyers, and I don't really care what you have to say about that. And he says it's against the rules, and I say, well, I really don't care, and you'll be kicked out of here. And I say, well, I also don't care about that either. And then and then she's like, I'm going to go get the security guard. And I
Did the security guard appear?
No, and I just said I don't care about that either, because I really don't care about any of those things.
Did this woman did she give her name?
No, but we could go in and get it if you want.
We could
after the meeting. Yeah.
Now, but I know this isn't the first experience we've had with, shall we say, library interference.
No, this would be a number of times. But I was also going around the other day before I went down to Lompoc to visit my family down there, and left them on the tables with everybody and talked to them and whispered to them, hey, yeah, we're having a meeting next week at City Hall. And then a guy named Brian yelled at me that it was against the rules and against. And I go,
yelled in the library?
No, he yelled at me in the library that it was against the rules, and I said,
Did you yell back, or were you properly quiet?
Yeah, I just said, well, I don't care. And then he kept saying more things, and I kept saying that I didn't really care.
You seem to have, that seems to be a...
It's better than no comment. It's better than no comment, which I could have said too.
Just say thank you.
Yeah, but anyway, the other funny thing is I don't have the flyer here, but I usually go in every time I have a new event or a new flyer that I print, and then I go and I go, how many branches?
Chief, there he is.
How many branches are there? Now, because sometimes they're being renovated and stuff, right? And so the Aptos Library and the Live Oak Library, they both reopened. So there's a 10. So I leave her the flyer against nuclear war, and which is impending, and asked, like, say, hey, we've got one for each branch. And the woman was really nice, and she said, I don't think they can put these up. And I said, well, you had a display over here about censorship for the whole month of the last month. So that would be censorship. That seems really hypocritical to be.
Peculiar, certainly.
Yeah. So she took the flyers, and then I wrote Howard, whose office is over there, who's the acting director, and sent him a copy of the said flyer, but I haven't heard back from him yet.
Right.
So, and I left a message saying, hey, I'd like to make sure my flyer goes to all 10 branches. Thank you.
Now, this was the occasion when Brian spoke to you?
And that was the same time that Brian, after I had the little experience of her claiming that the library might not want to post something because they didn't agree with the message, which is very similar to censorship. They also...
Well, certainly the major networks do that all the time.
I know, but it's a library, and it's our library. I've actually handed out flyers before, like when we did the Freedom Sleepers. I'd walk through, do the same thing, leave a little flyer next to each person and say, hey, man, we've got a thing over. Every protest I've had at City Hall, I've gone through that are about homeless issues. I go through and do Last I heard about the Poganip was that they went and put tags on people's tents and told them they had to leave in 24 hours. And
Coral Street, right? Or Poganip as well?
Poganip, yeah. They've already cleared Coral Street. They already cleared Harvey West. They
Do you know where anybody from Coral Street went?
They went to the Poganip. Well, the first time there were sweeps on Coral, they went to Harvey West and to the Poganip, and then they cleared out the Harvey West, and they've cleared out the Poganip a few times, but now supposedly they were really clearing it out. Yeah. So then I noticed that late at night there are people in every doorway on Center Street, Front Street,
Last
Cedar
time
Street.
you were down there was?
Like last week, like last Thursday. There was like all kinds of people all over downtown. So people camping by the post office in the old post office camping area. There were people across the street from the post office. There are people at the Bank of the West or whatever it's called now. But then they all get tagged and kicked out. Tony was sleeping at the where the mailboxes are or like at the tree at the end of by the post office where he used to live. So I'm sure he got kicked out. I've seen him wandering around right now. So that's probably happening.
What do people have? Do they have tents, tarps, or just...
Many people come to me for tents. A lot of tents were taken, but I gave out a lot of tents and sleep bags again. So that's happening. I did have an interesting conversation when I was Thursday with a woman from the shelter. I don't know which part of the Coral Street shelter system, but that's where she was. And she was like so hated the shelter. She said she was younger, probably like in her early 20s, and she the staff's been feeling me up and sexually molesting me. The food is horrible. They treat you like you're a crap. They're horribly mean and just a nightmare. So.
They make you feel, perhaps, as Chief Martinez or Escalante, might have said. I could have queried him, but he drove off too quickly. I didn't think of it in time. That they weren't making. He was trying to make the chief's objective, which is to make people feel less welcome, and something to that effect. Apparently, we keep hearing the same story from one of our members that that's what she swears she overheard at a table when the police chief was in the same room at some cafe.
I wouldn't be surprised, but I think the entire system is getting to be like, I have a friend that just turned 70, and she was so angry. She stayed a month longer than whatever the legal amount is you're supposed to stay there, and she never She busted her ass trying to find housing, never did get it. But she was like one of the staff people who was like insisting if she wanted to stay, she had to give them a blowjob. So, and I've heard that from other people too. And this is every shelter. It's always like this kind of stuff, right? Or you have to be in the drug scene that the staff is involved in, and because if you don't buy in, they get worried you're going to turn them in, and they might get in trouble, things like that. This is I remember Episcopal Sanctuary in San Francisco in the 90s. That was happening. You know, I'm not surprised that that's still happening. So. And I'm Keith, and you may have heard of me. I helped start Food Not Bombs. And what is your name, Gloria?
Gloria.
She's in Food Not Bombs. What's your name, Gloria?
Gloria. Gloria.
Everybody here is Gloria.
It's a glorious day.
And then Robert, there's supposed to be we thought there'd be a ruling. Does anybody here know the Martin versus Boise thing? That's most people living outside. Okay, so Martin versus Boise meant that they couldn't criminalize you. It was a Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals ruling in San Francisco where they couldn't criminalize you for if they didn't have enough indoor places for you to be. So if you were caught sleeping over here at the library outside, they couldn't ticket you and let if they didn't have shelter bed for you. Right? So anyway, with the Martin versus Boise, essentially most people will tell you that the city ignores it, and all cities ignore it, right? You get tickets if you live outside anyway, but they make up different things like trespassing or smoking, or they don't give you the camping ticket. Because the way the cities have interpreted it, as long as they don't give you a no camping ticket, then they're not violating Martin versus Boise, even though they're ticketing you essentially for being unhoused. So that's how they've reinterpreted how to get around Martin versus Boise. And so anyway, I'm Keith, and I helped start Food Not Bombs like 44 years ago. And then, so anyway, there's this ruling which I've been handing out, which is going to come soon, called Grants Pass versus Johnson. And Johnson was an unhoused person in the town of Grants Pass, and she got ticketed. And part of the thing there was they had a very restrictive Christian shelter that didn't allow her to bring her dogs and things like that. So she was getting busted for living outside in a vehicle, I believe. And so anyway, she sued using the Martin versus Boise argument that it's cruel and unusual punishment to be ticketing people and criminalizing people for living outside when the community didn't provide enough indoor places for people to live. So Martin versus Boise languished for a number of years. I think, when was the ruling? 2018 or something like that?
2014 was Martin versus Boise.
2014.
No, that was Bill versus Boise.
Yeah.
It became Martin versus Boise.
Yeah, so whenever the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals ruled in our favor, then theoretically, then as you've been living outside, you probably don't ever get camping tickets. So what they'll do is they give you other tickets, right, for being outside. And they say that gets around the restrictions of the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals in Martin versus Boise. Or they say that they do have enough housing for everybody, and what they do to comply with that, which you may know because we live outside, is they'll kick a few people out of the armory and then say, oh, we got space, so you wasn't violating Martin versus Boise because you could have been in one of those 4 beds at the armory. So now the thing is that the governors of Newsom, the mayors of San Diego, LA, San Francisco, Portland, and so on, in conjunction with this CIA organization called Cicero Institute, were able to get the Supreme Court to hear the Grants Pass versus Johnson case. So they're supposed to announce, and there was a lot of media that it was going to be announced on Wednesday, and we would know how the Supreme Court of the U.S. ruled. And my personal believing is no matter which way they rule, it's going to be used as an excuse to so-called clean up the cities and place people in either the mental facilities under Proposition 1 that just passed, or they will force people into camps. Now the mayor of this city, before he was mayor, Fred Keeley, he came to me and maybe even you, right, and Alicia, Robert, and proposed that they have what he was calling a mega shelter, much bigger than Housing Matters. and it'd be like a navigation center, he called it, and it'll be 5 times bigger. So anyway, that he's trying to get a bond measure passed to raise $1 billion to build this mega center and so on. But down in San Diego, they already started that. So they've got, in this flyer, it shows their little thing that they made, and it shows how the 715 people will be in bunk beds in one room. And then there'll be another floor with 135 and another floor with 105. And it's an old paint factory, or no, printing company. And they're just gutting the building and then installing stuff inside. And it actually is self-contained, and if you were not ever have been homeless, you might think, oh, this is really great. They got a little basketball court, they got a dining hall, they got a place where you can smoke, you know, a place to run dogs, whatever. Probably a lot of that won't end up being there in the end. And then they got showers and toilets. The concern that a lot of people have, particularly me, is that it's self-contained. So there can be a point where they don't actually let you leave. And if you've been living at the Armory any amount of time, you know how they have all these policies about the vans, right? So at the beginning, there was like every hour a van would come down, and it started, I think, at 6 in the morning, and it got back up there about 8 o'clock at night, the last one. And then they had budget cuts, so it became less and less. And as the budget cuts kept happening, it got down to like in the morning, at noon, and at night, I think is what the current schedule is. So then it wouldn't be that much of a problem to just never have the van bring you to town ever, right? And still enforce some law that you can't walk to town, right? So there's a very subtle way of reducing people's freedoms, particularly homeless people's freedoms, in this kind of march towards internment camps. So there was a 47,000 bed camp built. It was going to be built at Concord Naval Weapons Station for the Bay Area homeless, but that seems to have been that's no longer happening. But there is now a proposal to have a camp in Camp Roberts off of 101 down by Paso Robles, down that area. And that's what the mayor, not Fred Keeley, who proposed this mega facility, but that's what Donna Myers and former supervisor Ryan Coonerty had mentioned in a meeting. Unfortunately, the person that reported that was afraid for her job and wouldn't let us use her name. But so anyway, so this is a concern that the ruling could be that, okay, since it's illegal to criminalize people for living outside, we're going to coerce everybody into this thing called obligation to accept shelter, and then in some way move people in. But the sadly more likely story is that they will rule that it is not cruel and unusual punishment to criminalize the homeless, and they will make it legal to force people against their will into these facilities, or go to so you'll get a choice of a prison, you know, like the jail, or get to be in one of these facilities. And of course, people will often opt for these, even though you only get the little 2 tote bag boxes, and you only get the bunk, just like what's on this side. This is the bunk beds thing that they've got. Yeah, we've all been in these dorms as alleged criminals. Yeah, it's just like a minimum security jail, and then you can take jail.
They give you a tote. They feed you. You can't leave.
Yeah. So you can see how so the totes are these 2 things there. One is for the top bunk, one's for the bottom bunk. So all your belongings have to be in one of those.
Really?
And then you have to live in one of these bunks. So anyway, so now that we don't really know what the details of it is, I'm thinking we should organize another event and really go over the whole what they're saying. And then everybody in the group, my intention was everybody here we would know what it was. I would print it out, we would read it, and then everybody would give input as to how to react to whatever they're, like what could we do, like protest or non-cooperation or, and whatever they're going to institute, don't be alarmed that they're going to do it the first day or something. It'll be like this slow trickle, like everything will get a little more intense, and because they don't want to start riots and a rebellion or any of that. So it's very hard to determine how cities are going to interpret the ruling, but I suspect either way, homeless people lose. I don't think there's a possibility. It can be interpreted, like, okay, you can't criminalize the homeless, but you have to be inside anyway, and there's going to be like enticements to get people into these mega camps that they're talking about. And one of there's two things that concern me. One, the homeless population is increased 12% nationally, according to point in time count, which is never very accurate by a lot. And then so it probably went higher than that. Now the people living paycheck to paycheck is at 81%, above the 78% of 5 months ago. And then you have so you have more homeless people. You have more people potentially going to be homeless because of the way the economy is going for poor people. And then you have the final thing that's very frightening is the advent of a world war. And then when you have a world war, a lot of the restrictions and the sensibilities that people have in a pre or World War situation go out the window. So we saw, for instance, Japanese internment camps were fine in World War II, and the Germans rounded up all their homeless people and put them in camps at the beginning of World War II, and then employed them to work on the war industry, and then eventually, of course, stopped feeding them and started gassing them and stuff. But hopefully that won't happen around here. But anyway, it just like a world war opens the possibility for a lot of the decorum that one would expect to go out the window, because it's a national security threat. Our people are dying in Europe and the Middle East and so on. So we have to all hold together. I think a lot of the people living on the streets will actually just get to be join the military, which will be a great deal more freedom than a lot of things. So this lawyers organization, they have one idea of what it will mean, which is on the paper. And then there's probably, what's his name, Mark, that does Invisible People TV. He has a really great documentary that just came out, where a podcast about internment camps and the likelihood of internment camps. And he's like, he's not a very radical person, but he does a beautiful job of interviewing homeless people. And so if his guests and him are thinking it's going that way, that's kind of intense, because usually I'm the most radical of anybody, and to have people that are less radical than me think the same way I am, that's kind of frightening from my point of view. It kind of confirms my thought. And I've been concerned about this for a long time, both the World War happening and the potential internment of homeless people. But I think it'll be like what they did with, again, like the Armory, where the vans will come every hour, and they'll start early in the morning, so you could go to your job and stuff. And then they will have budget cuts, and the vans will come less, and then eventually the vans just won't come, because there won't be any money, because you have to spend it on the war effort or whatever it is they're going to need to do. So I think it's a huge civil rights issue. I assume that there'll be a lot of lawsuits afterwards, even though it's supposed to be settled in law and the Supreme Court. And it's also very possible that the ruling of the Supreme Court could be so lame that everybody thinks they won, or everybody thinks they lose, because it'll be like a half measure. But listening to the oral arguments, I was surprised. I've never heard house people ever speak with that level of understanding of homelessness. It's very, very rare in their questioning of the lawyers. So in a sense, that sounds optimistic. A lot of people thought it was very optimistic, and I thought that was very impressive. But as to how they actually see the constitutionality of this, different things. One, I noticed when I tried to rent an apartment here, I was not allowed to rent an apartment because I have a misdemeanor conviction. I actually really have a felony conviction, but there's no law in this. There needs to be a law that you can't be denied housing because of. I mean, maybe if you have a sexual offenders listing, that kind of makes some level of sense. But if you, every homeless person has a chance of, it's high likelihood of getting a misdemeanor conviction as an unhoused person at some point in your life, and that means you can't get housing. The other thing is wages are completely not related to the expense. Like, so the one place I almost rented was $800 a month, and I got the top bunk with 2 other college students. And I'm like 65 years old. I don't want to be climbing on the top bunk for $800 a month, sharing a room with 2 other students. So it should be that you could. I eventually found a friend that would rent to me for like $1,100 for a room shared in her apartment. But so there needs to be that kind of thing where, so my Social Security is like, is $1,200. So that was like really, that's crazy. That you get, well, at least I had food stamps, and that kind of stuff, and at least I do food on bombs. So anyway, so having the rents be related to the wages in some manner, where you could work a full-time job and then you could also rent a room. So like in San Francisco, the homeless population there expanded hugely when they started tearing down all the single-room occupancy hotels. So they had all these single-room occupancy hotels in the south of Market, and most of the guys that were in them were dock workers. But 2 things happened: containerized shipping, and they laid off 65,000 dock workers, and then they started bulldozing all the single-room occupancy hotels to make sure room for Moscone Center and all that. So nobody's thinking ahead. So I've been at City Council in '88 when Robert brought me down here, and I was like, we have to think. We have like 1,000 homeless people. We have to think, what's it going to be like? Because when I started, there was virtually no homeless people when I started Food on Bombs, and so over 44 years, you see this larger and larger increase. So if you're trying to organize society to help the homeless, you have to think, okay, next year there's going to be probably double the homeless in the county. You have to have double the services and stuff in the county. Then any of you know that you've had to deal with social services, and you got to do the vulnerability thing to get housing, and then they've got all the levels, 3 forms of rapid rehousing and all these things, and the whole thing is like a nightmare of quagmire, and everybody has their vouchers for years at a time, and then and so there just has. And then there's the theory, which one of the reasons that they're advertising all these high-rise buildings everywhere and saying that a small percentage of them will be so-called affordable, is supposed to reduce the rents by creating the supply and demand of the capitalist market system. But there's no evidence that that's happening, because a lot of buildings have been built in California and the rents keep going up, and the housing prices overall keep going up. And so there has to be a lot of reorganizing of the way the whole system is, but it's designed specifically to, a lot of it is that when Clinton started a lot of the programs that we're now suffering under, there was tension between the Democrats and the Republicans, and so or probably fake tension, but tension nonetheless, and they don't want the homeless people getting one over on the taxpayer, right? But the military gets the biggest budget in the world, and they can't account for $21 trillion. But you don't want a homeless person getting enough money to live, because then they're getting one over on the good taxpayer. So it's that whole mentality of, maybe even at the core of it, is to stop having this ideology that all the homeless are mentally ill drug addicts that can't do anything for themselves, and it's their own fault they're out on the street, and that they're human animals. Or if you go on Nextdoor.com, never go on Nextdoor.com. I only last like a day, and then I always get kicked off. But it's just like bad-mouthing of homeless people all day. Oh, I saw a homeless person over there, he's going to rob us. I remember one day, the only day I could get on Nextdoor.com, I got kicked off the next day because I was advertising the memorial service for the homeless. But I was reading on it, and it's like there's a black guy going through the west side, and he's like almost he's going to be over on Bay, and I happen to I go outside, and I'm sitting there, and sure enough, there's this black homeless man coming by who was a friend of mine. And he's like 70 years old on a bike. And here at nextdoor.com, they're all going, lock your doors, lock your doors. It's 10 in the morning, this guy's gonna steal from you. And that's that attitude of hating people that live outside is a real problem. So then in this would never happen in America, but it's been a proposal. Is in Finland, what they did is it was a penalty if you had a second house, and that way it forced people to rent housing to people. If they did have a second house, it had to be occupied. And there've been proposals like that here, hasn't there? Like that if a house is occupied for 6 months or more, that there be a big tax and trying to get people to do it. But I don't know if that passed. And then the other problem is no one enforces any of the things. You know, like they have all this affordable housing trust. Who knows where that money went to? Because it's got to be hundreds of millions of dollars by now. Because all these developers just pay into that instead of having affordable housing. So that could be. Then also, what do we do with the money? It's like they have these audits and they can't figure out where the homeless funds go. Remember when so there's another thing. So we got, the city got $14 million a year ago for homelessness. And I don't know what they did with that. I think they're spending about $250,000 a police sweep of camps is roughly what's happening with that. And then Housing Matters just got another $2 million. And that ended up being earmarked for tiny homes at Housing Matters and getting rid of everybody on Coral Street and Harvey West. So that's the other thing, is the money just disappears into the void. So there's billions of dollars, like HUD says that for $20 billion they can end homelessness in America. That's on their website, and it says it several places on their website. It's probably a low ball, but say if it was 40 billion, and then we just send 61 billion to Ukraine, and so we could have saved like 200,000 lives in Ukraine and housed every American for what we just sent to Ukraine. You know, it's crazy. So it's a matter that there's no interest in solving homelessness at all. There's just no political will. And I think at the root cause is homeless people, like Palestinians, are not humans, so do as you please. You know? The language of the people in power surrounding, even when you're in Palestine, the Zionists, they're like, they don't think that the Palestinians are human, and you go on nextdoor.com, they don't think the homeless are human. So it's like all the same kind of mentality. So it's also really shocking to have spent 44 years feeding the hungry, and it was like there was 30 people in the Pine Street Inn total in Boston, in a huge city of like 600,000 in the city limits and 2 million in the surrounding area, and the shelter has 30 people, and there was no food for homeless people in 1981. And they asked us, say, hey, you should do that every day. There's no food for us. There's no soup kitchens at that time or anything. And now you see, like, people laughed at us that there'd be people standing in line to eat at a soup kitchen. And then now, no one with young people at the university, you talk to them, they assume that there's always been thousands of homeless people all over the place, right? They don't remember a time. And the reason there were no homeless people in 1981 was that there was public housing, which was terrible, but there was a lot of it. But they also had horrible laws surrounding that too, which made life worse. So, like for instance, they never maintained the public housing, so people hated public housing. They built it. So that's another thing. They could be like SROs made all over, and that way then you had your own room and your own bathroom and your own place to cook. And then just have the wages be such that you could pay for it, or that your Social Security would be only 1/3 of your income. Sort of like what you have in Section 8, but have it like universal. And then for people that wanted to get into, if you've met, anybody trying to get into Janus or something, it's crazy. It takes I have one friend, I spent 12 months trying to get him into a clean, sober living facility, and we know the system really well, and they're all friendly people, but they just never can get them in. You know, because there's not enough space, and you know, so there's that. You know, it's very rare you get anybody into Janus or anything like that, and so there could be, because you know, definitely people have substance abuse issues, and they should be able to have help, but it's very hard for people to get that help. So there's that. There's not towing of people's vehicles when they live in them. I can't tell you how many older women particularly come to me after their cars are towed and they've lost all their belongings, and they say if they're a women's shelter, and there is a women's shelter, but the problem with the women's shelter, the Monarch, which is a good thing to have, is that really you're supposed to be a victim of domestic violence and you need to have had an address that you're fleeing from. And if you're fleeing from a car as a single woman, that because your car was towed, then you don't qualify. So then to try to get you into the, you know, into Housing Matters can take a huge long time. And so we end up giving them tents and getting some people that we trust to live outside to help them set up their camp in a safe place, you know, and that shouldn't be happening in Santa Cruz. So there's many solutions to it. Yeah.
About the SROs in San Francisco, I've learned that the SROs rent to you for 28 or 29 days, and then you have to leave because they don't want you to have renters' rights.
Correct.
And so then you come back in a couple of days, and then, you know, it starts all over again. So.
But you could lose your room.
Yeah, but so housing, of course, is what's needed, but how can you maintain housing unless you have a job? So the deal is the job situation. We hear it see it in the newspapers. Oh, all these jobs are opening up. Yeah, what are they in? Healthcare. You know, the restaurants are all dying.
Right.
So it's very limited. You know, they're making this big splash over how the economy is recovering because, you know, now they're hiring healthcare workers who make a pittance. So.
Yeah. Yeah, and as you know too, people living outside were tradespeople, many of them, right? And they got injured. I don't know how many people I've met that are disabled now because of their job, and then their workman's comp runs out, and you know, and then their Social Security isn't enough to pay for rent, and that's a common thing. So there could be that as well, where all the people that are disabled.
And also, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
Next? Okay, I just wanted to mention what many people here know, perhaps the Palomar Hotel doubled their rents. And then at the end of this month, the St. George Hotel is giving out notices that their rents will be doubled.
So even low-income people are losing their housing that they were able to secure. So that adds to the homeless population.
Yeah. I actually heard in Salinas there's a 300-unit apartment complex that's being evicted right now for renoviction. They're going to upgrade all the amenities and everything, but who's going to be able to afford to move back in? So I did have a question. I was thinking about Ross Camp and San Lorenzo Park, the benchlands, and you know, the community energy that came with that. You know, the housed community really solidly locking arm in arm. That was so awesome. Do you feel like Santa Cruz has it in them to do it again?
I don't know. There was real fast eviction from Camp Phoenix, which was the retaking of Ross Camp. But maybe so, and maybe not in direct response to the ruling, but over time as the unhoused population, it gets to be so visible. One positive thing about the increase of homelessness is a lot of people, these are all new people, who aren't stuck in the rut of living outside and then having to, you know, kind of getting normalized to the existence of living outside. So they might have a lot more energy and be a lot more pissed off about being homeless, and therefore maybe there'll be more ability to organize in that.
Yeah. And there'll be more unhoused people when Mayor Keeley, he was mentioning in the newspaper the other day, and you know, about the 29 acres south of Laurel. They're going to take out 29 acres of homes and businesses so that they can build high-rise apartments. Because he says, we have to make room for new residents. Well, what about the ones that were there? They're going to wind up on the street.
Yeah, because it's a lot of low-income housing in that area.
And what new residents? Who's going to move here? These are, investments often for foreign governments and peoples and corporations.
Well, it's interesting, the high-rise rush here is happening in a lot of places in America. So, I know we were at a Zoom meeting with the Union of the Homeless, and Patrick from Rochester Union of the Homeless was telling us how they build all these luxury condos on the, downtown, Rochester. And I have family from Rochester, and it's like, why would you spend $1 million on a studio apartment in Rochester? It's like, you got $1 million to buy something, go buy something, someplace where you want to live, because who wants to live in snow and sleet for 8 months a year? But anyway, so I think a lot of it's like you say, it's just investment. There's no intention of people living in it. And there's also, there was a study that showed that there's something like 20 empty units currently in the Bay Area for every homeless person in the Bay Area. So there's things like that going on. So there's a lot of housing, plenty of housing. It's a matter that the policies are so corrupt. And
excuse me, I do have an important announcement. San Lorenzo Park Apartments is opening up their wait list, and people can apply Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday from 9 in the morning till 3 in the afternoon. You bring your paperwork with you and go there and fill out their paperwork if you're interested. But that won't turn up for maybe 2 or 3 years, depending on where you are on the list.
but it's worth it. If you plan to live here 2 years from now, 3 years, that's a great location. Yeah.
Do they charge application fees?
No.
Oh, hey.
Yeah, that's another big problem for people living outside. Pay an application fee.
And it's a HUD subsidy, but a voucher, but it's not like the usual voucher. It's a different kind where it's a temporary voucher that they give you when you're accepted. So it's 1/3 of whatever your income is. So it is appealing on that.
Yeah, and that's what it should be. I don't know what the rules are at the new place across from the farmers market, but it's supposed to be some kind of special voucher that the housing authority has. And if you have that kind of voucher, then you qualify for that housing there. But I don't know if anybody that has that particular voucher, but somebody must. So, and then I know a lot of people are moving to occasionally get stuck in Watsonville, which they don't necessarily like because their action is down here. So, what do you got to say, Greg?
Not a lot.
Why not? Here's
I'm just brain dead.
Here's your flyer.
Brain dead, burned out. I got one.
Oh, you got one?
Thank
Cool, cool.
Give me
Are
a
you
second.
anxious at all about the ruling?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
What do you think might happen with the ruling?
5-4 against us.
And then what do you think, what the real issue is, how's the city and the state gonna deal with us if the ruling is against us? What do you think they might do with that?
The problem is going to be that every municipality will make a mad dash to be the most uncomfortable, so that people don't go there and they go elsewhere, and so that's a wicked incentive, for municipal government to operate on, and it's just going to hurt a lot of my friends and me, but we'll find a workaround.
Find some, yeah. Did you see Kentucky passed the same kind of version of what we have with 1011 here, Senate Bill 1011, which is sort of like 41.18 in LA, where you have little places where you can, I think it's like a huge percentage of LA you can't camp or sleep at. And then they put 400 people in the housing And it costs $17,000 a month per person to be put in these hotels. $17,000 per person. Then 450 people, total cost of yeah, I mean, you could almost rent an apartment for $17,000 a month. And almost. And so Kentucky though passed this ordinance that that you can't sleep in any public area or anything like that. But and then if a property owner feels that it's necessary, they can shoot you, and they're immune for liability. It's like, sort of like a stand your ground version of law. So if you have to shoot a homeless person because they're not cooperating, then you're protected from prosecution. But that's the only state where you're legally allowed to shoot homeless people right now, which is very good.
Yeah.
Jessica, that the reason that they can increase the rents is that they're, that's why they got rid of public housing largely, is that they signed a contract that it's affordable for X number of years.
Like for 25 or 50 or 30 years.
Yeah, and so the years have run out.
Oh, okay.
That's probably what has gone on.
I just know that there's the increase in senior homelessness, and so I thought that might correlate a little bit with.
And it might, and yeah, because the St. George was made, that was a 96, I think it was.
Okay.
Right? And so then it might be that then it's not.
That's bad news, right?
Yeah, something like that. So there could be, yeah, it's really tragic. But you see, you're right, senior homelessness, and particularly senior single women homelessness. I don't know if anybody's done a study on that, but what I perceive is the first time homeless people, when they come to me, are frequently women in their 60s, 70s, and 80s who have just lost their car, the car that they moved into when they lost their house. And that's often they say it's aggressive ticketing, and then eventually they can't register their vehicle, and then the car gets towed. And so, yes.
Are there any states or cities that are leading the way, like a good example, something that others can follow that's...
So, well, there was a lot of talk of Salt Lake City doing a great job, because they did build this center, and it was like a single room occupancy hotels, and a lot of people moved in, and they did.
Did you have to be a Mormon?
You didn't have to be a Mormon, no. But that certainly helped. But then my friends that worked there were like, but the reality is there's just hundreds of homeless people living outside this building where it's supposed to have ended homelessness. You know, they advertised it ended homelessness in Utah, but then there's camps outside the building.
Are they camped outside because there's not enough inside?
Yeah.
Inside?
Yeah, there needs to be like
so there just needs to be more of it.
Yeah, there needs to be double or triple the amount of housing. Yeah, and I think a lot of people don't qualify. They're like troublemakers. They're whatever. More into their meth or whatever than makes it reasonable to rent to them.
So Salt Lake City, is that it?
That's it in the United States. Houston said they solved it, but my friend, we just served 200 people in a hurricane. So if 200 people come out for a hurricane to eat, then I don't think it solved much. Yeah. So a lot of places will announce that they've solved it because they opened up a facility and a number of people got in. Like they also said in San Antonio that they solved it because they built that huge shelter. That's like I have friends that stayed in there, and they're like, well, never going back there, because they've like got 56 security guards. They've got cameras everywhere. If you're not yet vetted, you have to sleep in the lawn in front, which isn't the end of the world because it's San Antonio, but it's hot. And then, then if you're bad, they move you back out into the lawn because you can't, whatever. And a lot of people just can't deal with the prison atmosphere of that, so they just disappear. Go back out in the streets. St. Petersburg, Florida said they solved homelessness by building a new jail next to the old jail, and then they house the homeless in the old jail. But they were really good at keeping statistics on who was coming in and going and how long they stayed there and stuff. And they showed that people usually left in a month or so and went back out on the streets because just so regimented and, no freedom at all, no privacy. So, yeah, there's not. Finland is the big example of success, but it's largely due to housing laws. Yeah, it's a problem because this problem has been going on for a long time. You know, more and more people are becoming homeless all the time, and last 4 decades, and yet no one there's clearly no thinking ahead for the benefit of unhoused people. You know, there's thinking ahead for the benefit of people in power, but that seems to be it. So, yeah. Then the tiny homes thing, a lot of people think that's the big solution. But I don't know if
I've noticed a lot of those, you're not allowed to cook in there. You're not allowed to, a lot of them don't have bathrooms.
Yeah,
so
mostly.
You're supposed to,
Yeah, most of them.
I don't think they ever have bathrooms.
Not the ones that we've been getting.
Yeah, I don't know of any that ever had bathrooms.
So
Very
then-
poor ventilation.
Yeah,
They're just hot and cold boxes.
yeah, and then it's something that people think is it's so because people that are like Don Lane's pushing that, right? He was all over the media for how he built the tiny homes at Housing Matters, and that's like it's hip, it's like a trend, it's not like a solution. And then where do you get
product
land?
to sell.
Yeah, and then if you got land to build little tiny homes and shared bathroom and stuff like that, why don't you just build apartments that are,
Yes.
that are a third of your income? And anybody getting SSI and stuff, that should be possible to get into a place. The government's giving you money to do something, but end up people spending on a hotel a couple of nights at the beginning of the month in a hotel room and food and whatever they can do.
In the meantime, you need to be protected where you happen to be outside, and that is the current situation for a lot of people in Santa Cruz. And that's been true in spite of Martin versus Boise, the court decision that we're worried that Grants Pass is going to overturn, or I should say Grants Pass it actually is kind of expanding it, and then the cities through courts are trying to overturn it. But in the meantime, the real issue is how do we get the city to enforce Martin versus Boise, or realize that what's needed is to get the community to support people who are outside. You saw some of that where people gathered like in the benchlands, with the Union of the Homeless, which initially it was able to, through lawsuit and community support, get the courts to set up the benchlands, and the city essentially adopted that as their, interim concentration camp. And the reason I say that is because what they did is they would shovel more and more people, the city would shovel more and more people into the benchlands by eliminating other auxiliary camps that might have had more space, might have had more particular needs, met the needs of people, or were spread out, talking about Hell's Trail, Camp Paradise, the area in front of Housing Matters, the tracks, Pogonip to some extent. And then they claimed it was a health hazard. They shut it down. So, but the issue really remains what it's always been, since there isn't this housing, and there aren't these single room occupancy places that there should be. They're being destroyed. What can be done by people themselves who are out there and people who support them, to recognize that you have to support people where they are on the ground now and in their vehicles now. And that was one of the motivating forces supposedly of the Union of the Homeless, which hasn't been doing much unionizing recently, but hopefully will get more active. And I guess the first reality is to recognize where people are at, what they need, and that they, to some extent, I want to say people have got to get together and do it to some extent for themselves, but that's easy to say. I mean, hell, how do you do it at the same time as you're, struggling to deal with the last raid that took all your stuff? And I don't have an answer to that.
Yeah. So maybe we should vote for Greg to be the new president.
Greg for president.
There you go.
Wait till he wakes up.
Wait till he wakes up. Oh my.
Well, you're right though. Camp leaders or whatever, nurturers, captains, people that that do try to bring people together and share a meal, spend $20 for everybody else to eat. You know, those kind of people are the ones that are kind of shot callers anyway, and you know, just trying to regulate a little bit more, like minimal health and safety standards. You know, if you're going to do anything that could be considered criminal, do it in your tent, just like a home. Just lock it up, zip it in there, and now they need a warrant to come in. You know, and exercising a lot of these rights that honestly nobody respects. But you know, at least declaring it. I always tell people, you know, if there's people, take all your phones out, even if there's only one phone that's got battery to it. Just the bluff of even pulling it out, just even if it's dead battery, the cop might even walk away. You know, and that's, I don't know. Trying to keep them honest and authoritative is not an easy task.